Hi, you're watching The God of Gothic on the Time Team official YouTube channel with me, Tony Robinson. This is the throne of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. It's the most important symbol of the monarchy. It represents the Queen's relationship with Parliament, and it sits in the House of Lords. But it's only 160 years old. The man who designed it and everything else in here is honoured in the Palace of Westminster with a room named after him. Augustus Welby Northmore Pugin. In a 15-year period in the middle of the 19th century, Pugin designed and built 6 cathedrals, 40 churches and numerous private houses. He shaped our thinking on the way we build houses, with his own house standing as a blueprint for how we live now. He was also a designer of wallpaper, candlesticks, tiles, chairs, stained glass. His output was staggering. Thousands of drawings, thousands of designs. His look is clear. Pugin is the god of Gothic. Two years ago, this was the state of the house Pugin built for himself and his family in Ramsgate in the 1840s. It was one of the few small-scale domestic buildings he designed. He was better known for his large-scale and more public works. But this house set a pattern for decades after his death, influencing many others to build houses based on his thinking. Shockingly, it was about to be demolished, but was rescued at the last minute. As the house is rebuilt to his original standard, we too are out to rebuild his reputation.
The thing about Pugin is that he's influenced all our lives, because over the last 150 years or so, so many other architects and designers have copied him and borrowed from him that now you look around virtually any landscape in Britain and you'll find loads of houses that are directly influenced by him. He lived an extraordinary life. He died when he was 40. Apart from that, virtually the only other thing I knew about him was that he was the chap who designed all that really expensive wallpaper in the Lord Chancellor's office that there was all that fuss about a few years ago. But his legacy has been enormous, and in this film we're going to take a journey through that legacy. And we're going to start here in Ramsgate, behind this wall, at the Grange, the house that he designed for himself. And it's in here that we'll get some clues as to what was actually going on in the great man's head.
The Landmark Trust now owns the Grange and is restoring it to how it was when it was built in the 1840s. It'll take 2.5 years. Its design was revolutionary, way ahead of its time. It embodies all his thoughts and his work. Pugin designed the house, the wallpapers for the walls, the door jambs, the floor tiles, the stained glass windows and the paintwork. It's his vision. It's a rare example of the house of an English architect, designed and lived in by the architect.
I think we have to look back to him for a legacy of the way we are now. Ramsgate is the first modern small-scale domestic house in Britain. Look at any town in Britain today, it's surrounded by versions of the Grange in Ramsgate.
As you look at the building on the outside, it's very jumbled. It doesn't look like a kind of formally arranged building as you would expect to find in the 18th century, where everything is symmetrical and it's all very neat. It's very unneat. But as a result, on the inside, it really works. It's a kind of series of spaces which are designed around use and need and delight and all the things that modernist architects are really interested in, putting human beings at the centre of buildings.
Augustus Pugin was born in 1812. His father was French and worked as an architect's draftsman for Nash, the great designer of the early 19th century. Pugin lived in the Grange with his third wife, Jane, and his 8 children. To fully understand the impact that this house made, we need to understand what came before. Before Pugin, the Georgians built houses like this.
What do you think is the principal difference between what I think of as Georgian architecture and the kind of thing that Pugin was trying to do?
Oh, it's a very clear difference. A Georgian house was designed from the outside in. The architect designed a smart elevation and fitted the rooms in somehow behind it. What Pugin did was to turn that whole thing inside out. He designed each room as he wanted it, and he arranged them in a convenient way, and only then did he start to think about the outside. If I point out the principal rooms at the Grange, for example, you can see exactly how he did this, because it's a very unusual and really quite unprecedented plan. In the centre is the hall, which is a big square room with the stairs rising to the upper floor. Immediately to the right is the drawing room, which points out in this direction, and then the library, which was also his study, which points out towards the sea. And then the third main building is the dining room, which points eastwards towards the chapel. Each one of those elements is expressed separately on the outside, and the kitchen sits over on the right-hand side, quite distinct and quite unlike any kind of Regency building. There's a sense of dynamism about this plan, which is completely absent from other types of houses.
Returning the Grange to its 1840s state isn't easy. It takes some detective work.
This particular doorway here has helped us decode an awful lot of what was going on in the building in terms of its different phases.
In what way?
Here's a photograph of how the doorway was when we came here. We felt that it wasn't quite right in terms of Augustus's style. You can see how heavy this moulding is around the door. And then to our delight, this watercolour turned up, which was painted by Augustus in 1849. You can see the panelled ceiling, which we've got in the watercolour, now much stripped and degraded, but also here on the walls, a depiction here of the very diagonal wallpaper, the stained glass in the windows there, and just the general impression of a bright, friendly family drawing room.
They're very practically sized rooms, aren't they? It's a real family house. Oh, wow, look at this. Have a look at this ceiling. That's quite stunning, isn't it? That's really amazing.
Well, this is Augustus's library, and so it's not quite your average family room, in fact. This was the room he sat in to do much of his best work and painted it to reflect its importance.
You've got all these names around the edges. Scarisbrooke, Shrewsbury, Amherst, what are they?
Those are the names of his favourite clients, many of whom became personal friends. And you've got his favourite places as well, so Canterbury, Durham cathedrals and so on. And he liked to sit here and work surrounded by these favourite people and places to kind of inspire him and give him positive vibes about the work he was doing. The other thing you would have had would have been stained glass in these windows over here. The top lights were beautiful, bright, jewel-like stained glass, which we have and will conserve and put back in. But again, supremely practical, Augustus kept the lower lights as plate glass. Very modern in his day, because the patent had only just been issued for plate glass. But that meant he could sit here at his desk with beautiful sea light coming in over the paper.
By the time Pugin came to live in this house, most of his work had been done.
So he didn't separate work and life at all. And this, I think, is why he was such a workaholic, because he got joy out of what he was doing, even though it might have driven him to madness in the end, which is very sad. I mean, how could a man produce all that stuff in 15 or 20 years of working time? It looks like an enormous achievement if somebody had been working for 50 years.
Work continues on restoring the Grange in Ramsgate. Reproducing the exact colours is a tricky job. When Augustus Pugin designed and built this in the 1840s, this room was one of the most important. It's his library, where he did all his thinking, letter writing and drawing. To inspire him, he had the names of his friends and important clients written up on the wall, plus the places that inspired him and his most well-known projects. His output was staggering: 6 cathedrals, 40 churches and a lot of private houses, all in a period of only 16 years.
He poured the energy of 10 men and a very long lifetime into 16 years of work. And he wrote, designed, believed everything he did with such a kind of fierce, burning ferocity that actually people at the time couldn't cope with. You know, the heat was too strong.
So much output, so many drawings, and nobody else did them. You know, he didn't have an office. He didn't have all these assistants at all. I mean, Gilbert Scott, you know, the great names of the Victorian era, had vast offices with thousands of assistants scribbling away. It was just him.
This is the kind of stuff that he was drawing. He was 12 when he drew this. And that. And that. And that. Isn't that amazing? Pugin started drawing when still a child. He drew constantly, thousands of drawings. He just drew whatever he was able to see.
This is a very early sketchbook when he was working in the theatre. That was his first job when he was just 17 years old.
He was a flyman, wasn't he? Just changing those huge dramatic stage cloths.
That's right, and he was basically a carpenter, backstage hand.
You can imagine him squatting here with his notepad during a lull before the show started, can't you?
He was constantly thinking about the practicalities of the theatre, how to make it work, how to make the pulleys run more smoothly so that the cloths would go up and down.
That's what fascinates me, that although he's clearly obsessed by theatre, there aren't any pictures of the drama. It's all about the mechanics of how you achieve the drama. Look at these four exquisite drawings of cleats.
Because he knew if you could get these sort of details right, then everything else would run smoothly. And I think it plays into his architecture later on, that he's absolutely obsessive about getting exactly the right colour, exactly the right outline, because he knows that then the whole thing will come together and sort of sing, I suppose.
In the 1820s, he published Contrasts, a book that defined good architecture from bad. For Pugin, this archway's good, this one bad. The good one is properly proportioned and has integrity. This street front's good, this one's bad. It's disjointed and not as pretty. And this water pump is better in his eyes than this one. It's clear that for him, the good came from his love of the old medieval. As a teenager, he drew cathedrals in Europe while on visits with his father. In England, York Minster took his breath away. This was what a church should be about. He believed in pointed architecture, literally spikes and points heading towards the heavens. This style of building was to become Pugin's driving force. He took it on as his trademark. The medieval Gothic had died with the Reformation, and Pugin wanted it back. And beautiful as York is, one other cathedral made more of an impact: Salisbury. The great English cathedrals had started life as Catholic, and they were all medieval. Pugin fell in love. The medieval way was the right way. And he even embraced the Catholic faith. In his early 20s, around the time he went to Salisbury, Pugin converted to Catholicism, seeing it as the one true religion. He was partly moved by the architecture. Pugin embraced Catholicism with passion. In the Grange, he even built his own private chapel. It's a bit posh having your own chapel in your family house.
Well, it is a bit posh. It's also quite a radical thing to do, in fact.
In what way?
Well, Catholicism was still regarded with a great deal of suspicion in Victorian England. You'd only been able to be an MP if you were a Catholic for 10 years or so when this house was built. So Pugin was making a really strong statement about his religion.
He didn't think, ooh, there's an opportunity here for an architect. You know, I'll just convert and get all these nice Catholic jobs. He was the right man in the right place at the right time. There's no doubt of that. The Catholic Church needed a new architect. But I think he thought this was the true faith.
He was poised in the early 1830s to deliver to the Catholic Church, which was suddenly free to build all over Britain, a brand new style of architecture with which they could identify and say to the rather dull, non-conformist English tradition of building churches, at that time. We are the business. We have all the iconography. We have all the colour. We have all the gilding. We have all the decoration. This is the business. This is faith.
In 1829, Parliament passed the Catholic Emancipation Act. This meant that for the first time in a couple of hundred years, Catholics could not only organise themselves, they could assert themselves as well. Here in Birmingham, there are about 10,000 Catholics, and their leaders weren't the old landed gentry. This was the new, aggressive, industrial capitalist class. They wanted a cathedral that said that Catholicism was back, and this is what Pugin came up with.
St Chad's was the first Catholic cathedral to be built in England in 300 years. It wasn't just Pugin's first big Catholic commission, it was also his first big job. He was still in his 20s.
Imagine if you were a worshipper coming in here for the very first time, sometime in the middle of the 19th century. You'd see a cathedral, although frankly it could be a cathedral just about anywhere. But Pugin wanted to make a big splash. He once said he hated the idea of having to worship in a place that looked like a Wesleyan chapel, using church furniture that seemed to have been provided by the local repertory theatre. And that's a real giveaway, isn't it? Because this place is theatre, isn't it? Although it's not provincial rep, this is the National Theatre. Look at the proportions of that column. Look at this fantastic altar, this beautiful use of colour, really audacious reds. See how the whole place is like a stage that's been brightly lit. And above all, look at the position of the leading character.
It caused enormous excitement here in Birmingham when the cathedral was opened, because quite suddenly, from a tiny community that kept its head down, lived very quietly, suddenly Catholics were now a force to be reckoned with. He designed the building. He did it in 3 weeks. But he also designed the floor tiles. He designed the vestments that were worn on the day of the consecration. He designed the high altar and the great baldacchino and the shrine containing the relics of St Chad. He designed the chalice. He designed the candlesticks. He designed the holy oil stocks. The smallest detail was something he was concerned about. And it was one of his great gifts and qualities that he could see the thing on the big scale and do a building of such wonderful quality, and yet do such exquisite and detailed work in such a wide variety of materials.
Central to Pugin's whole being was the idea that what he was doing was to the glory of God. He saw the Grange as a medieval manorial site. He built a church next door as part of that dream. This was his vision. The reality is that he ran out of money and couldn't afford the spire. When he did have money to spend, though, Pugin tended to go overboard. In the early 1840s, Pugin's friend Lord Shrewsbury commissioned a church from him. It was to be his own church, paid for entirely by him. In Cheadle in Staffordshire, the church towers over the rest of the town. With money no object, for the first time in his life, Pugin was given completely free rein. The wealth of colour in this church is extraordinary. Every little bit's beautiful. Taken all together, though, it's a bit too much for my taste. This is genius working overtime.
One
stage, Pugin said he would stake his entire reputation on what he did here. He called it perfectidal, my consolation in all afflictions, and so it obviously was of great importance to him personally, in that he was able to do exactly what he wanted. He wasn't short of cash. He was able to put together all his ideas on not just the building, but the furnishing and the decoration of a church, everything that he set out in one of his key books, the Glossary of Ecclesiastical Ornament. It's all there. When we come to the consecration of the church in September 1846, there were huge crowds, clergy, bishops, 2 archbishops, and it had its impact on people within and outside the Catholic Church who came and they sketched and they wanted copies of this feature or that feature in their own churches and buildings across the country. Everything that he did is an expression of the Catholic faith, and you see the perfect marriage of the two. He wasn't an architect who was just doing a job. He was doing it from the standpoint of the faith that he shared and that he tried to express. So everything all knits together very well indeed.
For us in the Catholic community, he did so much to remind us of our heritage and our history, and that we really do belong in the whole life of the nation, and gave us a tremendous sense of self-confidence. But above all else, gave us these wonderful buildings, the shrines of the faith, places to pray and to worship, which really are truly the gates of heaven. You only have to walk in this building to just suddenly be caught up into the glory of God.
It's summer in Ramsgate. The Grange is still under wraps. The building renovation is moving along slowly.
But you can't get much of the chimney.
The project team is struggling with this flagpole.
But it's a fair distance up. I mean, if you take that proportion, it could be anything.
The flagpole in drawings done by Pugin is creating quite a challenge here. It's 8 metres high. Situated on the top edge of the building, with the wind whipping in off the sea, it'll place enormous strains on the fabric of the building's tower. They haven't cracked it yet.
I think it's going to be a mix between what is historically accurate and what works.
The layout of the Grange was revolutionary. Pugin designed buildings from the inside out. Each room was designed with its needs in mind. Each had a distinctive view. The central tower was built to house all the loos and service areas. All of it was connected by a series of long corridors. Many of the houses he designed had similar features: long connecting corridors, rooms which worked independently of each other. The outside shape reflected the shape of the rooms and features inside. Today, we can still see the effects of Pugin's work. These houses came 100 years after him, but many of the features are similar. A big chimney expressed on the outside, a window in a mid-level on a stairway, big windows for big rooms, small ones for small rooms. This big window tells us there's a big hallway here. These are all features that started life in the Middle Ages. Pugin just resurrected the idea in the Victorian period. Back at the house, there are a number of growing problems.
The rot on this half landing is extended into the further string.
Up here, yeah.
There's damp under the stairs, which will slow things down quite a lot. But even under here, Pugin's attention to detail can be clearly seen.
This staircase is going to have to be dismantled.
It's amazing. Even here, under the stairs, look, you've still got the beautiful, simple chamfering with the end stops there. He really did do it carefully, didn't he? Look,
yeah.
Finishing there on the treads and everything.
He meant for this to be seen.
Everything had to be done properly. The lead on the roof had to look smooth. Even the roof eaves, to be seen by no one, were finished perfectly. The fine details and the look were important to Pugin, not just as an architect, but also as a designer.
If you'd like to see more episodes like this, you can make it happen. Join over 10,000 Patreon members worldwide and see new digs take place and amazing additional extras.
In Ramsgate at the Grange, the stonework's going in. This stone has come from Normandy. In their restoration of the Grange, the Landmark Trust are using the same type of stone used by Pugin. He imported stone from France because that's what some of the great English medieval churches were cut from. Detail like this was important to him.
Do we have much idea of the kind of detail that Pugin put into the house?
We do. I think partly because he was building for himself. He left a huge amount of detail in his letters and so on. And also he had ideas about everything, from how the curtains should be weighted to just everything about the house. And so we've got a huge number of letters, drawings, sketches and so on that we can draw on.
There's not much left now, though, is there?
No, well, this is one of the bedrooms, but in fact we have a very good idea of how all these rooms were originally, and we're going to put them back to how they were in Augustus's day. But one of the key things has been trying to marry up the documentary side of the evidence with the physical evidence. This panelling was put up by Augustus in a sort of second phase of the house when he was coming back a few years after it was finished and getting it ready for a new wife. So we knew that it dated from the 1840s, but we thought, well, let's have a look and see if we can get back to the very first stage of the house. And so we took one dark January day, we came and took a piece of panelling off here.
Oh, wow.
And we're extremely excited to find these very mouldy, tatty bits of wallpaper. We know from letters what the wallpaper looked like, and we also know that it was a very personal design, designed by Augustus for himself.
Do we know what this writing was?
Well, there's more yet, because having found these mouldy scraps, we thought, let's see if we can find anything else in the rest of the room. And if you want to come over here, if you can help me shift this back, I'll show you what we found, yes.
Oh, look at that! That's so stunning.
This is Augustus's own wallpaper writ large, and you can now see it in all its glory.
En avant?
It's en avant, which is his motto. His father was French, and so it means en avant, forward. He designed it himself to put up in his house. Very strong use of writing, which is characteristic of a lot of his work, but it's quite bright, isn't it? And can you imagine that this originally went floor to ceiling?
A bit hectic in the room, I don't know.
Through most of the house, so it's maybe no wonder he decided to cover half of it up.
In the Grange, Pugin designed everything. His interior design work was as legendary as his architecture. His look was very clear. Even in domestic houses, what you got was Gothic. He was in demand by many with money to spend. Like here, Eastnor Castle, originally built in the 1700s.
The whole place was decorated in this rather austere mock baronial way, but in 1849 the second Earl decided that he wanted to have his sitting room redecorated. Pugin was called in to do the makeover, and this is the result. Did he use the same criteria in his interior design that he used on his architecture?
Yes, it had to be total, it had to be truthful, it had to be the real thing, but it had to integrate. He was worried about the doorknobs and the carpets and the wallpaper and the tiles and the furniture, as well as their integration with the whole structure. He saw a sort of Gothic vision of totality.
Looking at this room, though, it doesn't seem to me as though it necessarily fits all his precepts.
This room existed. This is the fake Gothic that Pugin really hated. You know, these vaults don't do anything.
No.
They don't hold the ceiling up. They're just plaster decoration. And in his polemical books, things like Contrast, he's saying, this is the pits. You know, this is disaster. Don't ever do this. It's dishonest, it's corrupt, it's fake architecture. It isn't even theatrical, it's just rubbish. But he had to compromise. He couldn't design this room. The commission was not rebuild Eastnor Castle. It was redecorate Eastnor Castle, work within the existing framework.
Pugin was a perfectionist, and he asked a lot of the team he gathered around him. They worked well together.
I think he was very lucky in his life. He met the right people. By chance, you know, like most things. Minton, the potter, the tile maker, Hardman, the metal maker, Myers, the builder, Crace, the decorator, the supplier of so many of his products. He had that team, and once he knew about them, and once he was confident and comfortable working with them, he knew they could do what he wanted. You know, he could drive them to produce the product he had in his mind.
The people who supplied Pugin's metalwork, tiles and furniture had a remarkable relationship with him. Between them, they developed a shorthand way of working that was to prove very successful.
He just makes a suggestion. He doesn't need to fill in all the details now because his designers know how to work with him. They're so familiar with his ideas. So he does half of the pattern but doesn't have to complete the whole of it, or just a quarter. And then he notes all the different colours, and because these have already been established, he doesn't have to go into any more detail. It's one of the ways he managed to be so productive.
Even half-done sketches like these ended up as finely crafted pieces. The drawing room in Eastnor is full of Pugin furniture.
That drawing is this table, and it matches perfectly. Pugin did quite a lot of octagonal tables. It was a standard Pugin thing, as were the chandeliers. So he just said, OK, they want an octagonal table. It's one of those. Here's the marquetry. Do it. Crace would receive that. He built this table. From that, Crace could extrapolate the whole pattern around the table, work it out. There might be an overall sketch for the whole thing, but that was enough. And these sketchy drawings, which have, you can see they've been done in 10 minutes. They are enough. That's the chair. There it is. Again, it was a standard sort of Pugin design. They all knew it. And you could see this arriving in the post. Oh, it's one of those. OK, chaps, you know, get out whatever it is that they use for that particular chair. This is the one for the bookcase. And this I love particularly because he's actually given him a choice. Look, you can have it this style or that style on the same drawing. It's very practical. And they said, actually, we prefer this one, so this is what you get. You get the two matched ends. But why waste time doing two drawings, you know, when one will do it?
John Hardman in Birmingham was one of the key suppliers, providing Pugin with metalwork and stained glass. And Hardman's company still exists today, doing much the same work. Hardman and Pugin understood each other.
Pugin had 100, 1,000, had 500 drawings to produce in a week. A drawing would be done wherever he was. Quick sketch, in the post, fold it up, stick a stamp wherever it is.
And send it straight off to Hardman?
Straight to Hardman. He was an amazing sailor, and he would whiz over to the continent, fill his greatcoat with finials, samples, all sorts of bits and pieces, bring them back to Hardman, and basically say, look, that's the finial I want. Please make me 400.
It does rather beg the question of where this precisely came from.
Well, he was just a very charming man with big pockets, and he would just go over and bring it all back. This small brass lion was exactly what Pugin wanted, so he would have been tootling around, maybe even came across the whole candlestick. That was too cumbersome to bring back. Leave the rest of the item with the person, just take the lion back, send it to Birmingham. This is the lion I want. This is what I want on the bottom of my candlesticks. You may see them on other objects, but really this was the lion that launched 1 million candlestick bases.
Pugin demanded material made to a very high quality, but he also needed huge quantities. So together, he and Hardman devised a way of doing it. Today, we take it for granted, but back then, it was a very new way of looking at things. They were designing for the industrial age.
This is all made as part of a factory process?
Absolutely. There's nothing on here that wasn't produced 100 times over. The idea for these cabochons, you could decorate the stem with maybe 1 or 2 of these, but these are literally component parts that can be removed, and if you wish for a different colouring, then these stones can be changed. It enabled Hardman then to produce this tremendous catalogue. You can take this off. That can be the candle holder in any candlestick you wish. This can remove and become the rim of any candlestick you wish. It's just attached to a different plate. Every part of it is individually numbered. When you've grown bored with the sort of elaborate top and wish to have something more simple, the whole thing lifts off and you're left with a single stick.
This is B&Q church furniture, isn't it?
Hardman's kept the quality, but many followed, and it really was catalogue order stuff. It was not quite B&Q, but not far off.
In 1834, the Palace of Westminster was destroyed by fire. The House of Commons, the House of Lords, and many other areas of the palace were gutted. Charles Barry, the well-known architect, won the commission to redo the palace in the Gothic style. Pugin was well known as a person who could draw Gothic detail well, so Barry hired Pugin to do the design work.
Were it not for Pugin, that building would not be a success. I mean, not only the interior detailing, all the furniture, the tilework design, are by Pugin. Not only that, but also a lot of the detailing on the outside of the building is very probably by him as well.
He did all the carved woodwork, from the House of Lords to the painted ceilings. He did all the metal work from the great brass chandeliers to the iron umbrella stands in the cloakrooms. He did all the stained glass. He did all the wonderful tiles that were made by Minton throughout the building. It was an extraordinary collection of work done at enormous pressure and at great speed.
And famously, he designed all the wallpaper.
It's an astonishing record of all the different types of wallpaper that were designed by Pugin and by Crace as well, to go into different parts of the new Palace of Westminster.
There are hundreds of these.
Well, yes, he designed patterns that could be reused in different places. So here, you see, you've got a white flower on a blue border.
Yeah.
But here, it's the same flower, effectively, but different colourways. So he only had to design it once, but then he was designing different qualities of wallpaper for different parts of the palace. So here you get this amazing gilt and flock wallpaper. Now that's for somewhere really smart. That's for a drawing room.
It's like an Indian restaurant in the 1970s.
Exactly. Whereas these are much more quiet. They're for a servant's room. And it is all about hierarchies.
What do you mean it's all about hierarchies? What's the hierarchies?
Well, he's making a distinction between the Palace of Westminster, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. So everything in the House of Lords is red, everything in the House of Commons is green. And then you move down through, the corridors and into the waiting rooms and into the servants' rooms. And at every stage you design something that is appropriate for that space.
Every detail had to be just exactly right.
Well, this is for the House of Commons. It shows one of the chairs, and hundreds of these chairs were made. And it went to the Craces and said, this is the shape it needs to be, this is what the rail needs to be like, this is what needs to be embossed, the big stamp, the portcullis stamp on the back of it. And most important, of course, the nails must show.
Why is that?
Pugin believed in revealed construction. That means honesty, so that if you're going to cover a chair with leather, you don't want to hide the way that it's attached to the wood. You want to show it and make a feature of it. So he wanted these decorative brass nails to be struck all the way around and hold the leather in place. And then you're making a virtue out of something which is very functional.
His crowning glory, though, was the chamber of the House of Lords. Getting the throne right took several attempts. The irony is, if St Chad's in Birmingham is theatre, this is a cathedral. You've got the choir stalls here, great big candles. There's the high altar. You've got 3 chairs for Father, Son and Holy Ghost. There's the altar rail. You've even got stairs so that the congregation can kneel down and take their communion. This is politics. It's very serious religion.
It was immensely admired. The opening of the House of Lords in 1847 by Queen Victoria left everybody absolutely flabbergasted. They were all overwhelmed by the colour, the richness, the ornate ornament. It was an enormous success right from the start. I just enjoy the inventiveness, the colour, the beauty, which seems so suitable for what it's trying to convey, the setting of our Houses of Parliament.
What I find it really difficult to get my head round is that when Pugin did all that, he was 25. Pugin may well have started work on the palace when he was 25, but the work here kept him busy for the rest of his life. For many, this place is his greatest legacy. But for me, there's an even bigger legacy, one that touches more of us than the Palace of Westminster. 2.5 years since the building work started, and the Grange in Ramsgate is close to finished. The outside is now looking similar to how it was when Augustus Pugin built it in the 1840s. The garden will have to wait until the spring. This house is important because it shaped the way we live now. Two and a half years ago, Pugin's house in Ramsgate looked like this. Now, it doesn't.
So, come and see Mr. Pugin's home.
Wow, this is a bit different, isn't it?
Well, there's a lot more colour on the walls now, I can certainly say that.
The word hectic springs to mind.
I think it probably would spring to mind, yes. This is his famous wallpaper in all its glory, anyway.
With the old en avant forward.
Exactly, and you've got little blackbirds everywhere. You've got them all over the walls.
Got
all
it
come
on
up
the chair
nicely,
too.
and even on his chair. Yes, this is to the original design, one of his original designs.
These tiles are gorgeous. I like these.
They're very colourful, and see how they run diagonally across the hall, and you've got diagonals up the wallpaper and diagonals up the banisters. Everything's very dynamic.
The detective work has paid off. The house now looks like it would have done when Augustus Pugin built it in the 1840s. The wallpaper, the paintwork, the stained glass windows, even the doorknobs. It's a feast for the eyes. It's rich and textured, beautiful. But for me, there's also something austere about it. This was the house of someone for whom religion was very important. It feels to me like a priest's house. Important and weighty.
It was a well-planned house. It worked as a family house. It was very comfortable. It was where he wanted to be. He had this emotional attachment to Kent all his life, and so he felt at home there.
In his 30s, his workload eventually took its toll. Pugin became increasingly mentally and physically ill. In 1851, he designed the medieval exhibit at the Great Exhibition. It was his last piece of work before he died at the age of 40.
His fame, which should have been nationwide after the Palace of Westminster, it just didn't take off. You know, Barry was the great architect of that wonderful construct. Barry got the knighthood. Pugin did a lot of the work, but in the end, people forgot he was there. And I think he just ran out of work, ran out of life.
He wasn't widely recognised at the time. The early descriptions of the Houses of Parliament do not in fact mention him by name. He was rather conveniently forgotten.
In the mid-19th century, Prince Albert died, and it was decided to build an impressive memorial in honour of his life. And the leading architect of the day, George Gilbert Scott, was commissioned to design it, and this is what he did. It's great, isn't it? Can you see Round the bottom there's a frieze of 169 leading men of Western civilization. They've got Pythagoras and Shakespeare and Homer. Lovely. But when he'd finished, shock horror, he suddenly realised that he'd left off the frieze the one man who'd been such a major influence on his own architecture, Pugin. Now, Scott had already carved himself onto the frieze, so he hacked off his own image, replaced it with Pugin, and then recarved his own head in the background, looking rather respectfully over Pugin's shoulder.
This house in Ramsgate is Pugin's greatest legacy. He may well be remembered for his big public buildings, for his churches and for the Palace of Westminster, but this house is more than just a middle-class house built for a large family.
It's come to represent what's British about the British countryside. You know, if you come home when you've been abroad on holiday, if you come home, what tells you that you're back in England is the scattering of houses just like this. Lots of the features here, like the steep gables, the dormers in the windows, the external chimneys, all of these things crop up again and again in the comfortable Victorian houses which make up so much of our landscape.
As we drive around the country today, there are tens of thousands of examples of houses that testify to Pugin's legacy. The idea of making spaces work inside buildings, wrapping the buildings around the interior spaces, was his. He led, many others followed.
He gives us William Morris, he gives us Gilbert Scott, he gives us Burgess, he gives us ultimately Voysey and Lutyens. You know, they're all great names who, in a sense, owe it all to Pugin.
Pugin is buried here, in the church next to the Grange at Ramsgate. Seems pretty appropriate, but it is a forgotten corner of Britain, part of our country that time has been fairly unkind to. Mind you, time's been pretty unkind to Pugin too, but we do owe him, not just for his beautiful religious buildings and his big public works, or even for the fine detail that he put into them. We owe Pugin more than anything else, because he is the man who put people back at the heart of our buildings. Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses and behind-the-scenes insights.